There are women who have been strong for so long that they no longer know where their exhaustion lives. They still go to work. They still take care of their families. They still reply to messages in a calm tone. They still smile when needed. They still appear before the world as someone completely fine. But behind that calm exterior is a very deep, very quiet, very hidden exhaustion. An exhaustion that is not loud enough for everyone to notice, yet quiet enough to make the heart grow heavier with each passing day. Perhaps you have been there too, still living, still carrying, still trying, but in a very private moment, maybe in the middle of the night, maybe after a conversation that made your heart turn cold, maybe while looking in the mirror and noticing that your eyes seem more tired than before, you suddenly hear a small question rise within you. Why do I keep waiting until I break before I allow myself to begin again? That is the sacred question carried by so many women. And today, from an original source of quiet, healing inspiration, we step into this truth together. You do not have to break in order to begin again. Many women do not realize that at first, because they have been taught through words or through repeated life experiences, that only when they have suffered to the bottom will others believe they have endured enough. Only when they are completely drained do they have the right to rest. Only when they have cried themselves empty do they have a reason to leave what is slowly wearing them down. But here is a painful and liberating truth. You do not need tragic proof in order to justify saving yourself. You do not have to wait until your heart is shattered into pieces before you are allowed to say, "This is enough." You do not have to be betrayed to the deepest point before you are allowed to build boundaries. You do not have to be completely forgotten before you are allowed to return to yourself. And you do not have to explain to the whole world why you chose peace. There are women who have lived for a very long time in a room that no longer fits their soul, yet they stay because they think, I can endure a little more coldness, a little more disrespect, a little more loneliness inside their own relationship, a little more of that feeling of having to shrink themselves so others can find them easier to accept. But the human soul was not created to live forever in places that make it curl inward. A room may be beautiful. A relationship may be familiar. A role may make other people praise you as good, sacrificial, understanding. But if staying there for too long causes you to lose your voice, lose the clarity of your heart, lose the joy of being who you truly are, then sooner or later, the deepest part of you will begin to cry for help. And sometimes that cry for help does not come through tears. It comes through numbness, through the fact that nothing excites you anymore, through the way you smile but feel no warmth inside, through the way you keep doing everything right, but no longer feel that you are truly living. A question must be asked here, very gently. Why do so many women accept less than what they deserve? The answer is not always simple. It is not because they are weak. It is not because they are not intelligent. And it is not because they lack dignity. Very often, it is because old pain has quietly taught them a false definition of love. If a woman grows up in an environment where love comes with conditions, she may easily believe that she must do more in order to be worthy of being loved. If she has been misunderstood whenever she voiced her needs, she may learn to stay silent in order to keep the peace. If she has been praised for being good at enduring, she may confuse endurance with virtue. If she has been abandoned before, She may cling to any attention as though it were a sign of care. And that is where so many wounds begin to disguise themselves as personality. She says, I don't need much. But the truth is, she is afraid that if she needs more, the other person will leave. She says, I'm fine. But the truth is, she does not want to be seen as difficult. She says, I just want everything to stay peaceful. But what she truly wants is to be loved without having to fight to be seen. That is not weakness. That is a heart that has had to learn how to survive in places that did not know how to cherish it. That is why healing does not begin by forcing yourself to become stronger. Healing often begins when a woman is honest enough to say, this is hurting me. I am tired. I have stayed too long in places that do not know how to value me. I do not want to keep calling this emptiness love. There is dignity in finally daring to admit that. Not a loud kind of dignity. Not the kind that stands on a mountaintop and declares that it has overcome everything. But the dignity of a woman sitting quietly with the truth, even when that truth makes her sad. It is when she no longer polishes her wounds, so that others will find them easier to accept. It is when she stops calling coldness, they are probably just busy. Stops calling confusion. Maybe they are hurting too. Stops calling neglect, I should be more understanding. Compassion is beautiful. But so many women have been taught to be compassionate with everyone except themselves. They forgive other people's carelessness with ease. They understand other people's busy schedules with ease. They wait, yield, stay quiet, swallow pain, yet they feel guilty for wanting peace. Guilty for saying no. Guilty for no longer wanting to continue something that is slowly wearing down their soul. Do you see it? A woman can carry guilt simply because she has begun to love her own peace. That is why healing, at first, often does not look like happiness. It may look like loss, like emptiness, like unfamiliarity, like leaving an old house, even though that house has not been safe for a long time. Because human beings do not only attach themselves to what is beautiful, they also attach themselves to what is familiar. And one of the hardest truths to accept is this: what is familiar is not always what is healthy. You may be used to being overlooked, used to always being the one who reaches out first, used to having to guess other people's feelings in order to keep the peace, used to sacrificing so much that you no longer know what you want, used to receiving tiny fragments of affection and telling yourself that it is enough. But familiar does not mean right, and suffering in silence does not mean maturity. Another question may need to be asked. How does a woman know she needs to begin again, even if she has not broken yet? Perhaps it is when she realizes she has asked too many times for things that should have been basic: clarity, respect, presence, sincerity. Perhaps it is when she no longer recognizes her own true voice, because for too long she has only spoken what would not make others uncomfortable. Perhaps it is when she notices that she is always tired after being around a certain person, a certain place, or a certain role. Perhaps it is when she understands that she has been living more from responsibility than from aliveness. And perhaps, more simply than all of that, it is when there is a quiet but steady voice within her saying, I do not want to live like this anymore. Please trust that voice. It is not pointless rebellion. It may very well be the healthiest part of you trying to lead you home. That return does not always come through dramatic decisions. Very often, it begins with small choices, very small ones, but full of dignity. You stop over-explaining other people's lack of care. You stop replying immediately to the places that only call when they need you. You stop shrinking your needs just to be kept. You stop trying to turn yourself into a more pleasing version in order to deserve love. You begin to rest when you are tired, instead of only resting when you collapse. You speak truthfully, gently, but clearly. You stop bargaining with your own heart. That is how dignity is rebuilt. Not through one grand declaration, but through daily decisions that say to your soul, I will not betray you anymore. A woman who begins again does not necessarily become a completely different person. Very often, she is simply returning to who she was before pain made her question her worth. Perhaps all these years, you were never lacking strength. Perhaps you were simply using that strength in the wrong place. You used it to stay too long. You used it to keep holding on instead of healing. You used it to protect the image that you were fine, while inside you needed to be held. You used it to lift everyone else except yourself. So what would happen if, starting today, you use that strength to return to yourself? Not to take revenge, not to prove anything, not to make anyone regret losing you, but to live more truthfully, more softly, more clearly, more peacefully. Perhaps this is the season when you do not need another tragedy to wake up. Perhaps this is the season when you simply need honesty. Honesty that you are tired. Honesty that you have confused sacrifice with love. Honesty that there are places where you stayed only because you were afraid to begin again. Honesty that you have asked for too little for a heart that needed to be handled with care. And if you ask, but is choosing myself selfish? No. If what you are choosing is truth, no. If what you are protecting is peace, no. If what you are refusing is prolonged erosion, no. If what you are learning is how to live without trading away your soul just to be kept, a painful but freeing truth is this. Sometimes a woman feels guilty for choosing herself, not because she is wrong, but because she is not yet used to not abandoning herself. Healing often begins right there, not when everything has already become beautiful, but when you stop treating pain as the necessary condition for deserving a new beginning. You do not have to break in order to begin again. You only need enough awareness to recognize what is wearing you down. Enough gentleness not to wait until exhaustion before rescuing yourself. And enough courage to believe that another kind of life, another rhythm of living, another kind of love for yourself is something you can learn. In the next part, we will go deeper into something many women carry in silence. Why pain can distort the way we see ourselves, why healing often feels unfamiliar in the beginning, and why choosing peace sometimes comes with a very real sorrow. One painful but liberating truth is this: pain does not only hurt us, it can also teach us to misread ourselves. It can make a capable woman believe she is difficult. It can make a loving woman believe she is too much. It can make a thoughtful woman believe she asks for too much. And after enough disappointment, it can make a tender woman believe that tenderness itself is the problem. That is how suffering becomes confusing. It does not always arrive like a storm that tears the roof off the house. Sometimes it arrives like a slow leak, quiet, repetitive, easy to explain away. A little dismissal here, a little neglect there, a little silence where care should have been. A little performance of love without the substance of it. And after a while, many women do not notice at first that they have stopped asking the right question. Instead of asking, why am I being treated this way? They began asking, what is wrong with me? That shift is one of the saddest things pain can do. Because once a woman begins to interpret mistreatment as personal failure, she may work harder instead of looking more clearly. She may become more accommodating instead of more honest. She may become easier to use, easier to overlook, easier to keep in uncertainty, all while believing she is simply trying to be loving. But love without truth becomes self-abandonment very quickly. This is why emotional healing must do more than comfort you. It must also help you name what happened inside you. It must help you see not only that you were hurt, but how that hurt changed your inner mirror. If a woman spends years in rooms where her feelings are minimized, she may begin to minimize them herself. If she is repeatedly loved only for what she gives, she may begin to believe usefulness is the same as worth. If she is praised for endurance but never protected in her vulnerability, she may start to think exhaustion is noble. If she is chosen only when she is convenient, she may mistake inconsistency for passion and attention for care. Let us pause there for a moment. What is the difference between attention and care? Attention notices you for a moment. Care considers you over time. Attention may flatter. Care steadies. Attention can be intense and still be shallow. Care can be quiet and still be deeply faithful. Many women were never starved only for romance. They were starved for consistency, for safety, for truth, for the feeling of not having to earn their place every day. So when attention arrives, especially after loneliness, it can feel like water. But not everything that rushes toward you is meant to nourish you. And that is not a judgment. It is simply a human reality. Hunger makes almost anything seem holy. So perhaps the more honest question is not, why did I accept less? Perhaps the question is, what kind of hunger was I carrying that made less feel like something? That question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. Because when you understand the hunger, you stop making your whole story about weakness. You begin to see the deeper truth. You were not foolish because you wanted love. You were human. You were aching. You were hoping. You were trying to build a home with the materials you had at the time. And still, healing asks for more than compassion alone. It asks for clarity. A woman may say, but I stayed because I loved deeply. And perhaps that is true. But love is not the only reason women stay. Sometimes they stay because leaving feels like failure. Sometimes they stay because peace feels expensive. Sometimes they stay because they do not want to hurt anyone. Sometimes they stay because they have built their identity around being the strong one, the forgiving one, the one who understands, the one who can survive anything. And sometimes, very quietly, they stay because they do not yet believe life on the other side could be gentler. That is why healing often feels unfamiliar at first. Not because it is wrong, but because peace can feel strange to a nervous system trained by chaos. A woman who has spent years bracing herself may not immediately trust what is calm. She may feel restless in healthy silence. She may feel suspicious when she is not being chased, tested, or confused. She may even feel empty when drama leaves, because drama once gave her a sense of movement, significance, urgency. This is one of the great paradoxes of healing. What is good for you may not feel natural right away. Why? because the body remembers what the mind is trying to outgrow. The heart may say, I want gentleness. But the old pattern may whisper, gentleness is boring. Gentleness is unfamiliar. Gentleness cannot be trusted. So a woman can find herself grieving old pain not because she wants it back, but because she does not yet know how to live without it. There is dignity in finally admitting that. There is dignity in saying, I know this relationship was draining me, but I still miss it. I know this role was too heavy, but I still feel guilty for stepping back. I know this pattern was harming me, but a part of me still wants to return because it is what I know. That does not mean you are going backward. It means you are being honest about how healing works. Healing is not a straight line drawn by a confident hand. Very often, it is more like a woman rebuilding herself, like a house with stronger foundations. She does not begin with curtains and flowers. She begins by tearing up what was unstable. She begins with support beams. She begins with truth, and truth is not always beautiful in the beginning. Sometimes truth is dusty. Sometimes truth is inconvenient. Sometimes truth leaves the whole place looking emptier than before. But emptier is not always worse. Sometimes emptier is how space is made for what is real. Let me ask another gentle question. Why does choosing yourself sometimes bring grief before peace? Because when a woman stops abandoning herself, she must also face all the years she did. She may grieve the time she lost trying to prove her worth. She may grieve the younger version of herself who thought being needed was the same as being loved. She may grieve the softness she offered in places that only took from her. She may grieve the words she swallowed, the boundaries she did not set, the nights she lay awake blaming herself for someone else's lack of care. This grief is not weakness. It is part of awakening. You are not only mourning what happened, you are mourning what should have happened and did not. You are mourning the tenderness you deserved, the honesty you deserved, the protection you deserved, the mutuality you deserved. And sometimes the tears are not only for the relationship or the friendship or the role you left behind. Sometimes the tears are for the woman who stayed so long because she had forgotten that she, too, was worth protecting. Please hear that clearly. Self-compassion is not letting yourself escape the truth. Self-compassion is telling the truth without cruelty. It is saying, yes, I abandoned myself there. Yes, I accepted crumbs and called them enough. Yes, I confused being chosen with being cherished. Yes, I made excuses for what was breaking me. And then, after all that honesty, it is also saying, and now I will not punish myself forever for what I did while I was still learning. That is mature healing, not denial, not endless blame, but responsibility wrapped in mercy. There is a form of womanhood that many people celebrate because it is convenient to everyone around it. It is the woman who gives and gives, who absorbs discomfort, who smooths tension, who says yes when her soul means no, who keeps the peace by betraying herself so quietly that no one notices the cost. But that is not wholeness. That is disappearance in polite clothing. A woman does not become whole by being endlessly available. She does not become whole by being chosen by others. She does not become whole by shrinking her truth until it fits inside someone else's comfort. She becomes whole by returning to herself. And returning to yourself is not selfish. It is sacred work. It is slow work. It is often invisible work. It may look like this. Pausing before you say yes. Noticing what your body feels after certain conversations. Telling the truth sooner. Resting before resentment builds. Letting disappointment teach you instead of defying you. No longer volunteering your softness where there is no reverence for it. These are not grand performances. They are small acts of dignity, and dignity is rebuilt that way. Not in one dramatic speech, not in one perfect breakthrough, but in repeated choices that say, I will no longer call confusion love. I will no longer call depletion purpose. I will no longer call fear loyalty. I will no longer call silence maturity when it is really self-erasure. Sometimes women ask, how do I trust myself again after I ignored so many signs? Very gently, the answer is this. You rebuild self-trust by listening in smaller moments. You listen when your chest tightens. You listen when your joy disappears. You listen when you feel the familiar urge to over-explain, overgive, overcompensate. You listen when peace enters the room and a frightened part of you wants to run. You listen when your spirit grows tired of pretending. Self-trust does not return all at once. It returns the way a voice returns after years of silence, quietly, fragile at first, almost uncertain. But the more it is welcomed, the steadier it becomes. And one day, what once felt impossible begins to feel natural. You stop arguing with your own needs. You stop needing pain to justify change. You stop waiting for disaster to permit honesty. You stop treating your breaking point like a spiritual requirement because you were never meant to need devastation in order to deserve renewal. You were never meant to wait until your soul was on the floor before you gave yourself permission to begin again. Sometimes the bravest woman in the room is not the one who can endure the most. Sometimes she is the one who notices early what is costing her spirit and chooses differently before collapse. That kind of wisdom does not usually get applause. It looks too quiet for the world, too subtle, too inward. But it is powerful in a way performance can never be. It is the power of a woman who has finally understood. My pain may explain some of my patterns, but it does not have to direct my future. In the next part, we will go deeper into the patterns that repeat until they are named. Why some women keep shrinking to be accepted. Why guilt often appears when peace is chosen, and how boundaries can be practiced without becoming hard, bitter, or closed. There are patterns many women live inside for so long that they begin to feel like personality. Not wounds, not adaptations, not survival strategies, just the way I am. She says, I'm just someone who gives a lot. But perhaps she learned long ago that giving was safer than needing. She says, I'm just very patient. But perhaps that patience was built in rooms where speaking up brought tension, distance, or punishment. She says, I don't like to burden people. But perhaps she was made to feel that her feelings were heavy, inconvenient, or poorly timed. She says, I'm independent. I can handle it, and perhaps she can. But perhaps she also learned that asking for tenderness was risky, so self-reliance became not only a strength, but a shield. This is why naming patterns matters, because what is unnamed often feels permanent, and what feels permanent is harder to change. Healing often begins when a woman realizes, this is not all of who I am. Some of this is what I became to survive. That realization can be deeply relieving and deeply unsettling. Relieving, because it explains so much. Unsettling, because now there is a choice to make. If this pattern is not my essence, then do I keep living by it? If this habit once protected me, but now diminishes me, do I still call it loyalty? If this way of loving keeps costing me myself, do I still call it virtue? These are not small questions. They can rearrange a life. One painful but necessary truth is that emotional patterns repeat until they are named with honesty. Not dramatic honesty, not public honesty, honest honesty. The kind that sits down in a quiet room and says, I have been confusing being needed with being valued. I have been calling emotional unavailability mysterious because I was afraid to name it as absence. I have been shrinking myself so I would be easier to keep. I have been staying loyal to roles, relationships, and expectations that do not return life to me. Once spoken, those truths are difficult to unlearn, and that is grace. Even when it stings. Many women keep shrinking to be accepted not because they lack intelligence, but because belonging has always mattered deeply. We are relational beings. We want to be seen, understood, welcomed, chosen. There is nothing shameful in that. The danger begins when belonging requires self-betrayal, when acceptance depends on how little you ask for, when peace depends on how much discomfort you absorb, when closeness depends on your silence, when love depends on your usefulness, when harmony depends on you swallowing what is true. At that point, what is being preserved is not connection. It is a performance. And performances are exhausting because they ask you to spend your life earning what should have been given freely: respect, consideration, basic emotional safety. Let me ask gently, what does shrinking actually look like in ordinary life? It looks like laughing at things that hurt you so no one will call you sensitive. It looks like saying, it's okay, when it is not okay. It looks like pretending not to mind when plans are always made around everyone else's needs. It looks like lowering your standards and calling it maturity. It looks like dressing down your dreams in conversations with people who are threatened by your growth. It looks like apologizing for your tears, your hunger, your rest, your boundaries, your ambition, your need for honesty. It looks like becoming so agreeable that even you cannot find yourself inside your own life. A room that no longer fits the soul does not always announce itself with obvious cruelty. Sometimes it simply requires too much folding, too much bending, too much editing, too much pretending not to notice the ache in your own back while trying to fit a shape you have outgrown. And women are often praised for this, praised for flexibility, praised for patience, praised for being low maintenance, praise for understanding everyone else's wounds while neglecting their own. But praise is not always proof of health. Sometimes praise is just the reward people offer when your self-erasure makes their lives more comfortable. That is a hard truth. But hard truths can rescue us. Because once a woman sees that shrinking has become a way of seeking safety, she can begin to ask a new question. What would it mean to stay present without making myself small? At first, that can feel terrifying. Why? Because many women learned early that honesty might cost them approval, and approval can become a kind of emotional currency. When you have spent years earning your place through helpfulness, pleasantness, emotional labor, or endurance, The thought of being fully visible may feel dangerous. You may wonder, will people still love me if I stop overgiving? Will they still come near me if I stop making everything easy? Will I still matter if I am no longer useful in the same ways? These questions go very deep. They touch identity. They touch memory. They touch old fears of abandonment and old bargains made in silence. But perhaps this is the season where those bargains must be brought into the light. The bargain that says, I will keep the peace if it costs me my voice. The bargain that says, I will be easy to love, even if it means being less real. The bargain that says, I will ignore what hurts, so I do not risk being left. The bargain that says, I will carry guilt for choosing myself, because guilt is more familiar than freedom. Many women do not notice at first how deeply guilt is tied to their healing. Guilt can appear the moment peace is chosen. A woman rests, and guilt whispers that she is lazy. A woman sets a boundary, and guilt whispers that she is cold. A woman declines another emotional burden, and guilt whispers that she is selfish. A woman leaves what diminishes her, and guilt whispers that she did not try hard enough. A woman chooses silence over explaining herself one more time, and guilt whispers that she is being unfair. But guilt is not always proof of wrongdoing. Sometimes guilt is simply the emotional echo of an old conditioning. That is why emotional maturity requires discernment. You must learn to ask, is this guilt coming from my conscience or from a pattern that was trained into me? That question can change everything. Because conscience says, you have harmed someone. Make it right. Conditioning often says, you have disappointed someone. Make yourself smaller. Those are not the same. A woman can disappoint others and still be in alignment with truth. A woman can set a boundary and still be loving. A woman can choose her peace and still be kind. A woman can stop overfunctioning and still be deeply good. This is difficult for many women because they were taught to associate goodness with endless access. If you are good, you are always available. If you are good, you keep understanding. If you are good, you keep waiting. If you are good, you keep carrying more than your share without protest. If you are good, you do not become hard. But boundaries are not hardness. Boundaries are clarity. Hardness says, no one gets near me. Clarity says, only what is honest, respectful, and mutual may stay near me. Hardness comes from shutting down. Clarity comes from waking up. Hardness often grows from untreated pain. Clarity grows from pain that has finally been understood. This is why a healed woman is not the same thing as a closed woman. She may still be tender, still generous, still compassionate, still open to love, friendship, family, community, beauty, and hope. But she is no longer available for confusion in the name of closeness. No longer available for depletion in the name of devotion. No longer available for self-neglect in the name of being good. That is not bitterness, that is wisdom. And wisdom in women is often misread by people who benefited from their lack of boundaries. Let us speak plainly about that. When a woman begins to change, not everyone will celebrate. Some will call her distant because they miss her overavailability. Some will call her dramatic because she now names what she once absorbed. Some will call her selfish because she is no longer rearranging her life around their comfort. Some will call her different, and they will be right. Healing should change a woman, not her essence, not her capacity for love, but the terms under which she gives herself away. If you have spent years being the bridge, the cushion, the peacemaker, the rescuer, the one who senses what everyone else needs before they say it, then boundary work may feel almost unnatural. You may fear becoming someone you do not want to be. You may think, if I stop giving so much, will I become uncaring? If I stop explaining, will I become cruel? If I stop chasing, will I become cold? If I stop carrying people, will I lose my softness? No. Softness and strength can coexist. In fact, that may be one of the most beautiful truths a woman can learn. Softness without boundaries becomes exhaustion. Strength without softness becomes armor. But softness with discernment becomes grace. And strength with tenderness becomes dignity. You do not have to choose between being loving and being clear. You do not have to choose between being gentle and being self-respecting. You do not have to become harsh to become free. Sometimes the soul grows stronger when it stops begging to be chosen. That line matters because many women have spent years trying to prove they are worthy of staying, worthy of being understood, worthy of receiving what should never have been withheld in the first place. They perform calmness. They perform patience. They perform loyalty. They perform forgiveness before trust has even been rebuilt. They perform resilience because they do not want anyone to know how deeply disappointed they are. But there comes a moment when a woman grows tired not only of pain, but of performance. She grows tired of explaining basic respect, tired of trying to appear unbothered by what wounds her, tired of interpreting mixed signals as complexity, tired of calling emotional confusion a phase, tired of trying to be the exception in places that do not know how to love steadily. And that exhaustion can become holy if it leads to truth, not the truth that says, I will never trust again, not the truth that says, nothing matters, but the truth that says, I can no longer afford to abandon myself just to remain acceptable. That truth does not always come with applause or relief. Sometimes it comes with trembling. Sometimes it comes with grief. Sometimes it comes with loneliness. Because when you stop shrinking, some rooms will no longer know what to do with you. Some relationships will feel your full shape and reveal that they were built only for a smaller version. Some people will ask for the old you back, not because the old you was healthier, but because the old you was easier to manage. That is one of the quiet heartbreaks of growth. You realize that not every connection was built to survive your wholeness. And yet, that realization is not the end. It is the beginning of cleaner love. Love that does not require self-erasure. Friendship that does not depend on one person always accommodating. Work that does not consume all your life force. Family bonds that can include truth. Community that makes room for your full humanity. This kind of life is rarely built in dramatic leaps. It is built in repeated moments of self-honoring. You notice when your body says no before your mouth does. You practice speaking sooner. You stop justifying every limit. You let silence do some of the explaining. You allow disappointment to inform your decision. You stop making a home inside potential. You stop calling delayed honesty care. You stop mistaking your ability to survive something for a sign that you should remain in it. That last truth deserves to be said slowly. Your ability to survive a thing does not mean it is your place to stay. A woman can survive neglect and still need to leave it. She can survive loneliness and still deserve companionship. She can survive overwork and still need rest. She can survive disappointment and still decide she will no longer volunteer for more of it. She can survive being misunderstood and still choose not to keep explaining herself to people committed to seeing less than what is true. Survival is not the highest goal. Wholeness is. And wholeness asks for honesty, boundaries, grief, practice, and patience. In the next part, we will move deeper into that practice. How a woman begins rebuilding dignity in small choices. How self-respect grows after long self-abandonment. And what it really means to begin again without becoming hard, hurried, or false. Dignity is rarely rebuilt in dramatic moments. It is rebuilt in the quiet places, in the private choices, in the small, almost invisible decisions a woman makes when no one is there to praise her for them. It is rebuilt when she pauses before saying yes, when she notices the heaviness in her chest and does not rush to explain it away, when she admits, without ornament and without shame, that hurt me. When she stops handing out access to people who have not shown reverence for her heart, when she chooses rest before resentment, when she leaves one conversation earlier, when she tells one truth sooner, when she no longer bargains with her spirit in order to appear agreeable. That is how self-respect begins to return after long self-abandonment, not as a performance, not as a mask of confidence, not as a louder personality, but as a steadier inner posture. There is a difference between looking strong and becoming anchored. Many women have learned how to look strong. They can speak well. They can carry much. They can move through disappointment without collapsing in public. They can hold a room together while quietly falling apart inside it. But becoming anchored is something else. Anchoring means that your center is no longer up for negotiation. It means your worth does not rise and fall with someone else's consistency. It means you no longer need confusion to feel chosen. It means your tenderness is no longer available at the cost of your truth. It means your life begins to take shape around what is real, not merely around what is familiar. This does not happen all at once. A woman who has spent years stepping over her own needs cannot simply wake up one morning and know exactly how to honor them well. She may still over-explain at first. She may still doubt herself after setting a boundary. She may still feel a pull toward old patterns that once gave her a sense of belonging, even while those patterns were draining her. That does not mean she is failing. It means she is learning. Learning to respect yourself after years of self-abandonment can feel strangely tender, almost like learning a new language with a mouth that has long been used to silence. At first, the words do not come easily. No, that does not work for me. I need time. I am not comfortable with that. I cannot carry this for you. I hear your feelings, but I will not betray my own. I wish you well, but I cannot continue like this. Simple sentence. And yet, for many women, those simple sentences feel enormous. Why? Because every new boundary often touches an old fear. The fear of disappointing someone. The fear of being called selfish. The fear of being misunderstood. The fear of no longer being needed. The fear that if you stop overgiving, people will stop loving you. The fear that if you become fully honest, the life you built around keeping others comfortable may begin to rearrange itself. And that fear is not imaginary. Sometimes things do rearrange. When a woman begins to respect herself more deeply, she often discovers who was relating to her truth and who was relating to her compliance. That can be painful because it means healing is not only about becoming stronger, it is also about seeing more clearly. And clarity can break the heart before it frees the life. A woman may realize that she was not deeply known in a relationship where she was deeply needed. She may realize that she was praised for her sacrifices more than cherished for her humanity. She may realize that people enjoyed her softness as long as it came without limits. She may realize that she kept trying to become more understandable to those who were only invested in what she provided. These realizations are not small. They change the emotional architecture of a person. They shift what she tolerates, what she names, what she longs for, what she walks away from, and what she finally invites in. Let us ask a tender question here. What does self-respect actually feel like when it begins to grow? It may not feel triumphant at first. It may feel quiet, sober, a little lonely, a little unfamiliar. Self-respect may feel like choosing not to send the message you would have once sent just to keep connection alive. It may feel like going home early from a place where your spirit begins to dim. It may feel like admitting that being understood someday is not enough to sustain you now. It may feel like not chasing clarity from someone committed to remaining unclear. It may feel like crying after you set a boundary, not because the boundary was wrong, but because an old part of you is grieving the version of love that required you to disappear. This is important to understand. Grief is not always a sign that you made the wrong choice. Sometimes grief simply means that a familiar pattern is losing power. A woman may grieve when she stops over-functioning. She may grieve when she stops rescuing. She may grieve when she allows another adult to carry what belongs to them. She may grieve when she no longer makes herself the bridge between everyone else's discomfort. She may grieve when she realizes how often she accepted emotional crumbs and called them enough because asking for a full meal felt too dangerous. None of that grief is foolish. None of it means she should go back. It means she is becoming more honest than her old survival patterns know how to handle. And honesty has a cost before it becomes freedom. Many women ask, quietly and sincerely, how do I begin again without becoming hard? That question carries so much wisdom because there are women who do not want to repeat the old pattern of self-abandonment, but they also do not want pain to turn them into stone. They do not want to become suspicious of everyone. They do not want to punish the future for what the past failed to give. They do not want their boundaries to be built from bitterness. They want to remain soft, open, human, warm. They just no longer want to be unprotected. That desire is beautiful, and it is possible. Beginning again without becoming hard means learning the difference between openness and access. You can be open-hearted without being endlessly available. You can be compassionate without becoming responsible for everyone's emotional life. You can be forgiving without returning to what breaks your spirit. You can be kind without making yourself easy to consume. You can be loving without calling self-erasure devotion. This is what emotional maturity offers a woman. Not a harder heart, but a wiser one. A wiser heart still feels deeply. It still loves. It still hopes. It still notices beauty. It still believes in goodness. But it no longer interprets pain as proof of meaning. It no longer confuses chaos with chemistry. It no longer calls one-sided effort romance. It no longer mistakes longing for alignment. A wiser heart ask better questions. Not, how do I make this work no matter the cost? But, what is this costing me? And is that cost telling me something true? Not, how do I become easier to love? But, why have I been trying to make myself smaller in order to receive what should meet me with dignity? Not, how much more can I endure? But, what would it look like to live in a way that does not require constant endurance? Those questions are not signs of selfishness. They are signs that the soul is waking up. And perhaps this is the season where a woman must stop measuring her goodness by how much pain she can carry without complaint. That has never been the right measure. There is no holiness in chronic self-betrayal. There is no virtue in being endlessly depleted. There is no grace in remaining in spaces that ask you to fracture yourself in order to belong. Grace is not the same as tolerance. Grace tells the truth kindly. Grace leaves room for humanity. Grace does not humiliate. Grace does not harden unnecessarily. But grace also does not keep volunteering a woman's spirit for preventable harm. Sometimes women were taught a version of love that always leaned outward. Take care of others. Be patient. Be understanding. Give second chances. Keep the peace. Stay soft. Do not make a scene. Think of everyone else's feelings. Some of that counsel holds tenderness. Some of it holds wisdom, but without self-respect, it can become dangerous. Because a woman can become so devoted to being loving that she never learns how to stop what is unloving. She can become so practiced in empathy that she forgets discernment. So skilled at understanding pain that she excuses patterns. So committed to peace that she tolerates what slowly destroys it. This is why beginning again must include both mercy and truth. Mercy says, I understand why I became this way. Truth says, but I cannot remain this way if it keeps costing me my life force. Mercy says, I was doing the best I could with what I knew. Truth says, now I know more, and I must live differently. Mercy says, I do not need to hate my past self. Truth says, but I also cannot let my past self keep choosing my future. That balance matters. Too much mercy without truth, and a woman may continue excusing what harms her. Too much truth without mercy, and she may become harsh with herself, ashamed of her own tenderness, embarrassed by the years she spent hoping. But healing needs both. The backbone of truth, the warmth of mercy. Together, they create dignity. And dignity changes ordinary life in quiet but unmistakable ways. A woman with growing dignity does not rush to fill every silence. She does not panic when someone withdraws rather than communicating well. She does not automatically assume she is the problem when another person is inconsistent. She does not spend all night translating mixed signals into meaning. She notices what is present. She notices what is absent. She notices what her body knows before her mind wants to admit it. She lets patterns speak louder than promises. She lets peace become one of her forms of intelligence. That last line is worth lingering with. Peace is not only a feeling. Sometimes it is information. If your spirit grows heavy every time you enter a certain space, that matters. If your body tightens before certain calls, that matters. If your joy keeps disappearing around the same person, that matters. If you keep feeling confused where honesty should be simple, that matters. Not every discomfort means you should leave. But repeated diminishment is not something to spiritualize, romanticize, or endlessly explain away. A woman rebuilding herself like a house with stronger foundations cannot afford to decorate instability and call it home. She must pay attention to structure, to what holds, to what cracks, to what drains, to what steadies, to what invites her to keep betraying her own interior life, to what lets her exhale without fear. And this attention, practiced consistently, becomes self-trust. Self-trust is not the belief that you will never make another mistake. It is the quiet knowing that when something is off, you will not keep abandoning yourself to avoid the discomfort of truth. That is a sacred change, because a woman who trusts herself differently lives differently. She does not wait for complete devastation before responding to what hurts. She notices earlier, she speaks sooner, she leaves cleaner, she apologizes less for what is reasonable. She stops demanding extraordinary evidence before honoring ordinary pain. She understands that a bruise does not need to become a wound before it deserves care. This is how beginning again becomes a daily practice rather than a dramatic event. You begin again when you tell the truth in one conversation. You begin again when you stop chasing people who enjoy being pursued but not known. You begin again when you rest before collapse. You begin again when you choose not to return to the familiar just because the unfamiliar feels empty. You begin again when you allow your life to be built around mutuality instead of longing. You begin again when you stop requiring heartbreak as proof that change is allowed. And still, all of this asks for patience. Because a woman can understand these truths in her mind long before they feel natural in her body. She may know she deserves more and still tremble when she asks for it. She may know she needs boundaries and still feel guilty when she holds them. She may know she is no longer meant for certain rooms and still weep when she walks out. That does not make her weak. It makes her human. In the next part, we will go further into that humanity. How forgiveness fits into healing without becoming a doorway back into self-betrayal. How a woman learns to grieve what she lost without losing herself again. And how renewal begins to feel real in everyday life. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood parts of healing. Many women were taught to think of forgiveness as immediate release, quick grace, noble silence. They were told that if they were truly loving, truly mature, truly spiritual, they would let it go quickly, move on quietly, keep their heart open, do not dwell, do not get bitter, do not make too much of what hurt them. But real healing is rarely that tidy. Forgiveness is not pretending something did not matter. It is not calling harm a lesson before you have even admitted it was harm. It is not reopening the door to what repeatedly diminished you. It is not using spiritual language to rush yourself past grief. And it is certainly not offering endless understanding to others while withholding honesty from yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing a woman can say is, I am not ready to forgive in a way that makes me lie. That sentence holds wisdom, because false forgiveness is just self-abandonment dressed in beautiful words. A woman may say, I have forgiven, while her body is still bracing, her sleep is still restless, her spirit is still carrying the weight of what was never properly acknowledged. She may think she is being evolved, when in truth she is merely bypassing the slow, necessary work of facing what happened and what it cost. Forgiveness without truth is fragile. It sounds good. It may even look graceful from the outside, but inside, it leaves confusion untouched. And confusion has a way of returning. One painful but liberating truth is that many women were not only hurt by what happened, they were also hurt by how long they kept denying its impact. That second wound matters. The relationship may have been inconsistent. The friendship may have been one-sided. The family dynamic may have required too much silence. The workplace may have praised their usefulness while draining their spirit. But beyond all of that, there's often another grief. The grief of how long they stayed at war with their own knowing. That is why forgiveness must begin closer to home than many people realize. Before a woman worries about whether she has forgiven others enough, she may need to ask, have I told myself the truth yet? Have I allowed myself to feel the anger beneath the sadness? Have I admitted that something sacred in me was crossed? Have I stopped minimizing what hurts simply because it did not look dramatic from the outside? These questions are not designed to keep you stuck. They are designed to make healing honest. Because anger, too, has been misunderstood in the lives of many women. Women are often allowed sadness, sometimes even exhaustion, but anger, especially clear anger, often makes people uncomfortable. A sad woman may receive sympathy. An angry woman often receives correction, so she learns to soften her language. She says she is disappointed when she is furious. She says she is tired when she is wounded. She says it is fine when it is not. She translates violation into inconvenience. She turns betrayal into misunderstanding. She turns deep frustration into a private ache and carries it quietly so no one has to deal with the full truth of what she feels. But anger is not always ugliness. Sometimes anger is the soul's alarm. Sometimes it is the part of you that still knows you deserved better. Sometimes it is the last living branch of self-respect before the tree goes numb. The question is not whether anger appears. The question is what you do with it. Untended anger can harden into bitterness. Suppressed anger can turn inward and become shame. But understood, anger can become clarity. It can say, that crossed a line. That was not care. That was not mutual. That was not honest. That was not loving, no matter what name I once gave it. There is dignity in reaching that level of truth, not because it makes you superior, but because it makes you real. And healing requires reality. Many women fear that if they fully feel their anger, they will lose their softness. They imagine that if they let themselves name the depth of what hurt, something in them will turn sharp beyond repair. But naming pain does not ruin tenderness. Very often, it protects it. Because what destroys tenderness is not always anger. Sometimes, it is the repeated demand to suppress what should have been acknowledged. Sometimes, it is the exhaustion of having to stay gracious in places that keep asking you to bleed quietly. A woman does not become bitter simply because she tells the truth. She becomes bitter when truth has nowhere to go. That is why healing asks for expression, not performance, not dramatic displays, not vengeance, not public theater. Just honest expression. Perhaps that means writing what you never said. Perhaps it means speaking with a trusted friend who does not rush you toward closure. Perhaps it means sitting alone and admitting, with no audience and no shame, I am angry because I mattered there, and I was not treated like I did. Perhaps it means letting tears and anger sit in the same room without forcing either one to leave. Grief is often more layered than people understand. A woman is not only grieving the person, the season, the dream or the role that ended. She may be grieving the version of herself who kept hoping, the future she imagined, the time she cannot recover, the energy she poured out trying to be enough for someone who was never meeting her with the same care. The years she confused patience with postponing her own life. And because this grief is layered, renewal often arrives in layers too, not all at once, not in one sunrise, not in one powerful realization. At first, renewal may be so quiet you almost miss it. It may be the first morning you wake up and do not immediately feel the urge to check who has not chosen you. It may be the first conversation where you tell the truth before resentment builds. It may be the first time you leave a room and feel relief instead of guilt. It may be the first time you notice beauty again without forcing yourself to. It may be the first time your own company begins to feel safe rather than empty. These are not small signs. They are evidence that life is returning, and scars in that season begin to change meaning. At first, scars can feel like shame, proof that you stayed too long, proof that you trusted the wrong people, proof that you gave too much, proof that you did not protect yourself the way you now wish you had. But healing slowly teaches a different language. Scars become evidence of survival, not shame. They say, I was wounded, yes, but I am still here. I misjudged some things, yes, but I learned. I broke trust with myself, yes, but I am rebuilding it. I lost time, yes, but not all is lost. There is something deeply human and deeply beautiful about a woman who can look at her own history without romanticizing it and without despising herself for having lived it. That is maturity, not pretending you were untouched, not pretending you always knew, not pretending the pain made you wiser overnight, but being able to say, I see now what I could not see then. I honor the woman I was, and I refuse to leave the woman I am becoming. That kind of self-loyalty changes everything. It changes how a woman rests. She no longer treats rest as a reward for collapse. She begins to understand rest as maintenance for a worthy life. It changes how she listens. She listens not only to words, but to patterns, to energy, to the quiet after effects people leave in her spirit. It changes how she loves. She no longer rushes to prove herself through labor. She pays attention to reciprocity. She notices whether care has structure, not just sentiment. It changes how she moves through disappointment. She no longer makes someone else's inconsistency a referendum on her worth. She feels the ache. She tells the truth. And she allows what is revealed to inform her next choice. This is what renewal looks like in everyday life. Not constant happiness, not perfect peace, not the absence of sorrow, but a growing honesty, a growing steadiness, a growing unwillingness to betray yourself just to avoid grief. Some women wait for healing to feel triumphant before they trust it. But healing is often much humbler than that. It may look like washing the dishes in a quiet kitchen and realizing your mind is finally not racing. It may look like not answering a message until you are actually ready. It may look like buying flowers for your own table. It may look like leaving work at a reasonable hour because your body is not a machine. It may look like no longer volunteering to be the emotional caretaker in every room. It may look like praying differently, speaking to your own soul differently, remembering that gentleness is not something you must earn. Sometimes women ask, how will I know if I'm really healing? Not by whether you never feel sad again, not by whether you never miss what you left, not by whether you become impossible to hurt. You will know by what you no longer negotiate. You will know by how quickly you return to yourself after disappointment. You will know by whether your peace has begun to matter to you in practical ways. You will know by whether you stop chasing what confuses you. You will know by whether you can sit with loneliness without running back to what depleted you. You will know by whether your inner voice sounds less like an accuser and more like a companion. You will know by whether your life is beginning to reflect the dignity you say you believe in. That last point matters very much. Many women can speak beautifully about worth, grace, self-respect, and healing. But the deeper question is, does your daily life agree? Do your habits agree? Do your boundaries agree? Do your relationships agree? Do your working rhythms agree? Does your self-talk agree? Does the way you allow others to handle your heart agree? Because dignity is not only something you feel, it is something you practice. And practice means repetition. A woman rebuilding herself like a house with stronger foundations does not lay one stone and call the structure finished. She keeps returning, keeps strengthening, keeps choosing, keeps repairing what was weakened, keeps removing what cannot hold the weight of her real life. That work can be tiring at times. It can also be deeply sacred because each small, steady act says, my life is worth building well. My peace is worth protecting early. My softness is worth guarding wisely. My truth is worth speaking kindly. My future does not have to be governed by my old wounds. Sometimes that future begins in a whisper, not a roar, not with a dramatic exit, not with a grand declaration, but with a woman sitting quietly and deciding, I will stop waiting for pain to become unbearable before I honor it. I will stop demanding devastation before I permit change. I will stop calling endurance the highest form of strength. I will begin to believe that renewal is allowed even now. That is where healing starts to become freedom. In the next part, we will go deeper into that freedom, how to live differently after the awakening, how to create a life that actually matches your healing, and how a woman begins to choose relationships, rhythms, and responsibilities that do not require her to disappear. After a woman begins to wake up to herself, a new question rises quietly but firmly. How do I live differently now? Not just think differently, not just feel inspired for a day, not just recognize old patterns in theory, but live differently. Because insight is precious, but insight alone does not rebuild a life. A woman can have a beautiful revelation in the solitude of an evening, can finally understand why she accepted less than she deserved, can even weep with relief at the truth of what she now sees. And still, the next morning, she must decide how that truth will enter her calendar, her conversations, her choices, her relationships, her work, her rest, her body, her home, her habits, her standards, and the quiet, private ways she treats herself when no one is watching. That is where healing becomes embodied. And embodied healing is humbler than many people imagine. It is not always a dramatic transformation. It is not always radiant. It is not always immediate. Often, it is a slow rearranging of daily life until your life begins to agree with what your soul has finally learned. A woman may say, I know I deserve peace, but then she must ask, what in my daily rhythm keeps stealing it? A woman may say, I know I need honesty, But then she must ask, where am I still participating in confusion because clarity might cost me something? A woman may say, I know I am worthy of tenderness. But then she must ask, am I treating myself with tenderness, or am I still waiting for others to give me permission? These are not glamorous questions, but they are transformative ones, because many women have spent years building lives around survival rather than alignment. They built around duty, around urgency, around being needed, around avoiding conflict, around proving their goodness, around making themselves indispensable, around carrying what was never fully theirs, around staying so busy they never had to sit still long enough to hear the grief in their own spirit. And when healing begins, one of the first shocks is this: a life built for survival may not know what to do with peace. Peace can feel spacious, unstructured, unfamiliar, almost suspicious. A woman who has lived in constant emotional reaction may not immediately know how to live from grounded intention. She may not know what to do with a quiet evening. She may not know how to make choices that are not driven by guilt, fear, urgency, or someone else's expectations. She may not know what she actually likes when no one is asking her to perform a role. She may not know what brings her back to herself because she has spent so much time being who others needed her to be. That does not mean she is empty. It means she is rediscovering, and rediscovery is holy work. It can begin with very simple questions. What makes me feel more like myself? What consistently leaves me depleted? Where do I feel I must perform? Where do I feel I can exhale? What am I calling responsibility that is actually overextension? What am I calling love that is actually fear of being left? What am I calling patience that is actually postponement of my own life? A woman who is beginning again does not need all the answers at once, but she does need the courage to begin noticing. Notice what your mornings feel like. Notice what happens in your body before certain obligation. Notice who leaves you feeling steadier and who leaves you feeling smaller. Notice when your yes tastes like resentment. Notice when your I'm fine feels like a betrayal. Notice whether your life has room for your own interior world or only for your output. Because one painful but liberating truth is this: many women have been rewarded for functioning well while privately unraveling. They were admired for their competence, praised for their sacrifice, relied upon for their stability, consulted for their wisdom, needed for their emotional labor. And all the while, their own inner life was undernourished. No one asked whether they felt cherished, whether they felt free, whether they felt safe enough to soften, whether they were exhausted from being everyone's dependable place to land while having nowhere steady to rest themselves. This is why healing after self-abandonment often includes a season of simplification. Not because a woman becomes less generous, but because she begins to understand that not everything deserves access to her life force. She simplifies the commitments that were built from guilt. She simplifies the explanations that were built from fear. She simplifies the relationships that survive only on her effort. She simplifies the version of herself that was trying to be digestible to everyone. And in that simplification, something beautiful begins to happen. Her life starts to become more honest. A woman living honestly does not necessarily live perfectly. She may still have messy days. She may still overextend sometimes. She may still feel the pull of old habits. She may still catch herself trying to earn ease instead of simply allowing it. But the difference is this: She notices sooner, and she returns sooner. That return matters. A woman used to live 5 months away from herself. Now perhaps she returns in 5 weeks, then 5 days, then 5 hours, then one moment of noticing, I am doing it again. I am abandoning myself to stay palatable. I am overriding my exhaustion to remain impressive. I am making someone else's discomfort more important than my own truth. I am slipping back into the old religion of overgiving. That moment of noticing is not failure. It is growth, because healing is not proved by never drifting. It is proved by how lovingly and how honestly you come back. This is especially important in relationships. A woman who is healing must eventually learn a new standard for connection. Not intensity, not chemistry alone, not history, not potential, not longing, not how badly she wishes something would become real, but mutuality. Mutuality is not glamorous at first glance. It may not create the same emotional drama as inconsistency. It may not feel as intoxicating as uncertainty. It may not demand that she prove herself in 100 anxious ways. But mutuality is where dignity can breathe. It looks like being considered without having to beg for consideration. It looks like effort that does not have to be extracted. It looks like honesty that arrives before confusion grows roots. It looks like care with structure. It looks like reciprocity that is not perfect, but present. It looks like being met. Many women, especially those who have spent years confusing love with labor, must learn to recognize being met as something holy. Because if you have lived a long time in one-sidedness, mutuality can feel almost underwhelming at first. It can feel calm, steady, uncomplicated, and some part of you may wonder whether calmness means there is no depth. But calmness is not the absence of depth. Sometimes it is the presence of emotional maturity. Sometimes it is what love looks like when it is not feeding on your anxiety. A woman rebuilding her life after pain must learn to stop asking only, do I feel deeply here? She must also ask, am I being cared for in ways that are real, consistent, and life-giving here? Those two questions are not enemies. Depth and steadiness can coexist. Tenderness and truth can coexist. Desire and dignity can coexist. But only if a woman stops romanticizing what repeatedly wounds her. This touches not only romance, but friendship, family, work, community, and spiritual life. Some friendships survive on one woman always being the listener, the planner, the bridge, the emotional container. Some family systems survive on one woman always being the one who understands, forgives, adjusts, absorbs, and smooths over discomfort. Some jobs survive on women who are praised for being exceptional precisely because they are quietly overburdened. Some communities survive on women who will keep serving long after joy has left their eyes. Healing may require a woman to ask, where am I loved and where am I merely useful? Where am I respected and where am I merely relied upon? Where am I free to be human and where am I only valuable when I am strong? Those are difficult questions, but they help a woman build a life that no longer requires her disappearance. And perhaps that is one of the deepest longings many women carry. Not simply to be admired, but to be able to remain fully present in their own lives. To remain present means you are not perpetually leaving yourself in order to maintain connection. It means you are not splitting in two every time your truth and someone else's comfort collide. It means you are not always living slightly outside your own center, monitoring the room, anticipating needs, adjusting your shape, lowering your volume, translating your hunger into something more acceptable. Presence is costly at first, because the world does not always reward women for being fully present to themselves. Sometimes it rewards compliance. Sometimes it rewards self-sacrifice. Sometimes it rewards emotional invisibility dressed as strength. But a woman who has begun to heal may no longer be able to live that way for long. Something in her spirit rebels, not with cruelty, not with spectacle, but with a kind of sacred refusal, a refusal to continue calling depletion normal, a refusal to continue making a home in what starves her, a refusal to continue apologizing for needing reciprocity, a refusal to continue organizing her life around the fear of disappointing people who were comfortable with her exhaustion. This refusal is not bitterness. It is self-honoring, and self-honoring has practical consequences. A woman may begin saying no without writing a whole essay. She may begin leaving margin in her days instead of packing them to the edge. She may begin protecting her mornings from other people's urgency. She may begin declining roles that require endless giving with little meaning. She may begin spending less time with people who only feel close when she is struggling. She may begin making her home feel like a place her spirit can rest. She may begin treating sleep, nourishment, quiet, prayer, movement, reflection, and beauty, not as luxuries, but as foundations. That matters more than many people realize. Because a woman cannot build a different life while keeping all the same rhythms that kept her disconnected from herself. If your days teach your nervous system that you are always on call, always late to your own needs, always one step away from depletion, then it will be hard to believe in peace, no matter how deeply you want it. So healing must eventually become rhythmic, not just emotional, not just intellectual, rhythmic. You begin to create patterns that support your becoming. Perhaps you take a walk without turning it into productivity. Perhaps you eat without rushing. Perhaps you let one evening remain unscheduled. Perhaps you stop reaching for your phone the moment loneliness appears and instead sit with yourself for 2 honest minutes. Perhaps you write down what is true before the world tells you what to ignore. Perhaps you stop filling every silence with noise because you are finally ready to hear what your own heart has been trying to say. These acts may seem small, but small acts, repeated, become a home. And that home is internal before it is external. A woman becomes a safer place for herself. That is one of the most beautiful signs of healing. She no longer meets her own sadness with impatience. She no longer meets her own anger with instant self-correction. She no longer meets her own fatigue with accusation. She no longer talks to herself only in the language of performance and correction. Instead, she begins to ask, what do I need right now? What truth am I avoiding? What would kindness toward myself look like here? What boundary is trying to form in me? What grief is asking to be acknowledged instead of managed? What decision would honor my peace, even if it disappoints someone? The more she asks these questions sincerely, the more her life begins to match her healing. And this is important. A healed life is not a perfect life. It still contains sorrow. It still contains work. It still contains uncertainty, disappointment, and seasons of weariness. But the center changes. The woman is no longer lost inside every difficulty. She is no longer bargaining with herself every time truth becomes inconvenient. She is no longer measuring her goodness by how much she can absorb. She is no longer building her future on the hope that people will someday become what they have not yet shown themselves to be. Instead, she begins to build from what is true. And building from truth can feel slower, less glamorous, less romantic, less full of fantasy, but it is sturdier. A woman rebuilding herself like a house with stronger foundations eventually learns this. Stability is not boring when you have lived too long in emotional weather. Safety is not small. Clarity is not cold. Consistency is not dull. Rest is not laziness. Boundaries are not cruelty. Mutuality is not asking too much. And beginning again does not require collapse. It requires willingness to see clearly, willingness to grieve honestly, willingness to disappoint what fed on your self-abandonment, willingness to practice new rhythms before they feel natural, willingness to let your life become simpler, quieter, truer, willingness to believe that your peace is not a prize you must earn after enough suffering. Sometimes women ask, but what if I build this new life and still feel lonely? You may, because healing does not erase the ache of being human. And choosing yourself can create a season where the old has fallen away before the new has fully arrived. That middle season matters. It can feel bare, uncertain, tender, like standing in a room that has been cleared out but not yet furnished. Do not rush that season. Do not fill it too quickly with familiar noise just because the quiet feels exposed. The middle season is often where self-trust deepens, where standards settle, where your spirit learns that emptiness is not always abandonment. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is recovery. Sometimes it is where your life is being unhooked from urgency so that something more honest can grow. A woman who can stay with that season gently, without panicking, without running back to what depleted her, is already changing at a profound level. She is learning that loneliness is not the same as misalignment. She is learning that unfamiliar peace may still be peace. She is learning that not every quiet room needs to be escaped. She is learning that companionship with herself is not a consolation prize. It is part of freedom. And freedom, when it becomes real, often looks simpler than people expect. It looks like not chasing what confuses you. It looks like not explaining your no to people who benefit from not understanding it. It looks like making choices your body can live inside. It looks like honoring ordinary pain before it turns into crisis. It looks like allowing your life to be built around truth rather than performance. It looks like letting care be measurable. It looks like no longer confusing exhaustion with meaning. It looks like keeping your softness without handing it to every unsteady hand. In the next part, we will go deeper still. How a woman learns to trust love again without abandoning discernment. How she carries hope without returning to fantasy. And how renewal becomes not just a personal healing story, but a wiser way of moving through the world. After awakening, after grief, after the long and tender work of returning to yourself, another question often rises softly at first, then with surprising force. Can I trust love again without losing myself again? That question is not only about romance. It is about friendship, family, community, work, spiritual belonging. It is about whether a woman can open her heart to life again without reopening the old arrangements that once taught her to disappear. And that question deserves a careful answer, because many women do not fear love itself. They fear what they became in the presence of love that was unclear, one-sided, conditional, delayed, or emotionally expensive. They fear the version of themselves that kept waiting, the version that explained away what hurt, the version that hoped so hard she could not hear what was plainly being shown, the version that confused emotional intensity with intimacy, the version that gave the benefit of the doubt until self-doubt became a way of life. So, when healing begins, some women make a quiet vow inside themselves. I will never be that open again. And that vow can feel protective, reasonable, even. But one painful truth is that fear can wear the clothes of wisdom if we are not careful. A closed heart may feel safe for a season, but safety and isolation are not the same thing. A woman does not heal simply by becoming unreachable. She heals by becoming discerning. That difference matters. Closing says, nothing enters. Discernment says, what enters must be true enough, clear enough, kind enough, steady enough, mutual enough to belong here. Closing is built from fear. Discernment is built from self-respect. Closing often hardens the life. Discernment clarifies it. A woman who is healing must learn how to keep her heart open without leaving the doors off the hinges. She must learn that tenderness does not require naivety, that hope does not require fantasy, that kindness does not require self-betrayal, that receptivity and wisdom can sit in the same room and still recognize one another. This is especially difficult for women who were taught directly or indirectly that being loving meant being endlessly available. They were told to be patient, to believe the best, to keep understanding, to wait a little longer, to trust the process, to stay soft, to not be so guarded, to not be so difficult, to not let past pain ruin something that might become beautiful. And there is some tenderness in parts of that counsel, but without discernment, it can become dangerous, because not every unfinished thing is becoming, not every delayed truth is depth, not every intense connection is a safe one. Not every person who stirs your longing is capable of meeting your life with care. That does not make love something to fear. It makes discernment something to practice. Let us ask a gentle question. What does discernment actually look like when a woman begins trusting life again? It looks like paying attention to patterns instead of attaching only to possibilities. It looks like listening to what is present, not merely what is promised. It looks like noticing whether words create steadiness or just anticipation. It looks like asking whether care has a structure in someone's behavior or whether it appears only when convenient. It looks like refusing to build emotional castles out of occasional kindness. It looks like seeing who someone is when your needs become visible. That last truth is especially important. A great many women have been loved best when they were easy. Easy to please. Easy to delay. Easy to impress. Easy to call when needed. Easy to receive from because their needs were quiet, their standards were flexible, and their loyalty was generous. But true care reveals itself not only in how someone enjoys your light, it reveals itself in how they respond to your boundaries, your clarity, your pace, your humanity, your fatigue, your truth. Anyone can enjoy a woman who asks for little. A steadier kind of love is revealed when she asks for what is reasonable and does not have to become smaller to receive it. This is where many old patterns attempt to return. A woman begins to hope again. She begins to open. Perhaps she feels a connection. Perhaps there is promise. Perhaps there is warmth. And then the old hunger whispers, do not ask too soon. Do not need too much. Do not make it hard. Do not say what you really want yet. Do not risk losing it by being honest. But honesty does not ruin what is real. It reveals it. That is a sentence some women need to hear more than once. Honesty does not ruin what is real. It reveals it. If a connection depends on your silence to survive, then the silence is not protecting love. It is protecting fragility, avoidance, or imbalance. If a friendship depends on you always being the understanding one, then your honesty is not the problem. It is the mirror. If a role depends on you being overextended to remain valuable, then your limits are not the disruption. They are the truth. And if a person withdraws the moment you become fully human, fully clear, fully honest, fully dimensional, then what is leaving is not a future you should mourn forever. It is an arrangement that was never built to honor your whole self. This clarity can feel sobering, even painful, because sometimes it means admitting that what you call potential was only hope stretched too far. Hope itself is not the problem. Women need hope. The soul needs hope. Hope is often what carries us through seasons that would otherwise hollow us out. But hope must mature. Immature hope says, maybe if I wait long enough, love will become what it has not yet shown itself to be. Mature hope says, I remain open to goodness, but I will not ask fantasy to do the work of evidence. Immature hope clings to possibility because reality feels too painful. Mature hope can sit beside reality and still believe in life. That is a different kind of strength. A woman becomes wiser when she stops asking only, could this become beautiful? And begins asking, is this true now in enough ways for me to trust the direction it is moving? That question protects peace, because many women have lost years not only to bad treatment, but to interpretation, to translating mixed signals, to filling in emotional blanks, to assigning depth where there was inconsistency, to turning silence into mystery, delay into complexity, uncertainty into a test of patience, and bare minimum attention into the early signs of devotion. This is not foolishness. It is often longing trying to make meaning out of crumbs. But healing invites a woman into a gentler, clearer way of seeing. A message that arrives only when you withdraw is not always care. Sometimes it is reaction. A grand statement without changed behavior is not always sincerity. Sometimes it is relief-seeking. Chemistry is not always compatibility. Intimacy is not always intensity. And being deeply affected by someone is not proof that they are good for your life. These are hard truths, but they free a woman from building her future on emotional weather. There is another question worth asking here. How does a woman remain hopeful without returning to fantasy? She learns to root hope less in specific outcomes and more in inner truth. Instead of hoping only that one person will finally understand, she begins hoping that she will understand herself sooner. Instead of hoping only that a relationship will become mutual, she begins hoping that she will no longer stay where mutuality is absent. Instead of hoping only that pain will disappear, she begins hoping that she will grow strong enough, honest enough, anchored enough to meet life without abandoning herself again. Instead of hoping only for rescue, she begins hoping for clarity, courage, dignity, and peace. That shift changes everything. because now hope is no longer tied to waiting. It becomes tied to becoming, and becoming is something no one else can fully withhold from you. Perhaps this is the season where a woman must redefine what a good heart looks like. Not a heart that believes everything, not a heart that excuses everything, not a heart that waits forever, not a heart that gives endless access to anyone who stirs emotion, but a heart that remains alive, soft, yes, but not porous in every direction, open, yes, but not unguarded where truth is absent, compassionate, yes, but not confused about what compassion requires. A good heart does not have to be endlessly wounded to prove it is good. Sometimes the healthiest thing a woman can say is, I wish this were different, but I will not build a home around wishing. That sentence is grief and wisdom together. It honors longing without letting longing lead. Because grief and discernment often have to walk side by side for a while. A woman may still miss what she now sees clearly. She may still ache for what might have been. She may still feel the tenderness of her own hope and the sorrow of watching it meet limits. But she no longer uses longing to argue against reality. That is maturity. That is freedom. That is self-respect in motion. And when a woman begins living this way, trust starts to change shape. She no longer trusts quickly, simply because she feels deeply. She no longer distrusts everything simply because she was once hurt deeply. She learns a steadier path. She trusts gradually, with observation, with listening, with time, with reciprocal evidence, with room for beauty, yes, but also room for truth. Trust becomes something grown, not granted all at once, not withheld forever, but grown like a garden, not a transaction. A woman does not plant a garden and then demand fruit the next morning. She pays attention. She notices what thrives. She notices what withers. She notices what needs sun, what needs pruning, what should never have been planted in that soil to begin with. So it is with love. So it is with friendship. So it is with rebuilding a life after pain. You do not need cynicism. You need observation. You do not need to become colder. You need to become clearer. You do not need to stop feeling. You need to stop interpreting every strong feeling as a sign to proceed. This is not about becoming suspicious of beauty. It is about becoming faithful to what beauty requires to last. Truth, steadiness, mutual effort, timing, maturity, reverence. And reverence is a word worth lingering with. A woman cannot thrive where she is merely desired, admired, consulted, or needed. She must also be treated with reverence, not pedestal reverence, not performance, not flattery, but reverence in the form of care, in the form of thoughtfulness, in the form of consistency, in the form of someone understanding that your heart is not a casual place to enter, that your time is not endlessly renewable, that your softness is not public property, that your peace has weight, that your trust is sacred, because it was not cheap to rebuild. Many women have spent years giving their tenderness where it was enjoyed but not revered. They were appreciated in moments, wanted in seasons, called when lonely, admired when shining, missed when absent, but not truly held with the kind of integrity that allows a woman to remain fully herself. And one painful but liberating truth is this: being wanted is not the same as being honored. When a woman learns that, she begins choosing differently. She no longer confuses pursuit with readiness. She no longer confuses admiration with capacity. She no longer confuses need with love. She no longer lets someone's emotional hunger become proof of emotional maturity. She asks, can this person hold truth? Can they hold complexity? Can they remain kind when I am not performing ease? Can they handle reality without punishing honesty? Can they meet repair with humility? Can they stay present without making me chase clarity? Can they honor my boundaries without treating them as rejection? These questions are not walls. They are wisdom. And wisdom does not make a woman less loving. It makes her love more truthfully. There is also a wider dimension to renewal that many women discover only after some healing has taken root. They realize that this journey was never only about one heartbreak, one relationship, one role, one season. It was about the whole way they had been moving through the world, about the rooms they entered already prepared to overgive, about the apologies that lived too close to their mouth, about the old reflex to smooth over tension, about the way they anticipated disappointment and then still acted surprised by it, about the spiritual and emotional habit of abandoning themselves early so that others would not have to confront what they were asking from them. And when this becomes visible, renewal grows larger than personal recovery. It becomes a wiser way of living, a wiser way of mothering, perhaps, a wiser way of friending, a wiser way of serving, a wiser way of working, a wiser way of resting, a wiser way of loving the world without handing it your whole nervous system. A healed woman does not move through life untouched. That is not the goal. The goal is that she moves through life with a stronger interior home. She can feel disappointment without collapsing into old conclusions. She can feel desire without surrendering her discernment. She can feel grief without calling herself broken. She can feel hope without worshiping fantasy. She can feel tenderness without making herself available to harm. She can feel loneliness without rushing back to what emptied her. That is a magnificent kind of freedom. Quiet, perhaps, but real, and perhaps that is what this whole season has been teaching. That beginning again is not only about surviving what hurt you, it is about learning how to love, choose, trust, and live in a way that does not require you to abandon yourself for belonging. In the next part, we will move toward the deeper integration of all of this. How a woman carries her healed self into everyday responsibilities. How she keeps growing when life becomes ordinary again, and how renewal turns into a long, steady companionship with truth rather than a single dramatic breakthrough. There comes a quieter stage of healing that few people talk about enough. It is the stage after the awakening, after the tears that finally told the truth, after the first boundaries, after the difficult decisions, after the brave departures, after the long nights of wondering whether choosing peace would ever stop feeling so lonely. It is the stage where life becomes ordinary again. And ordinary life can be surprisingly revealing, because many women imagine healing as a dramatic breakthrough, a clean turning point, a moment after which everything suddenly feels clear, light, and settled. But often, true healing is tested not in the dramatic moments, it is tested in the ordinary one. On a Tuesday afternoon when you are tired, in a conversation where someone asks a little too much, in a family dynamic that tries to return you to your old role, in a work week that quietly invites you to overextend, In a lonely evening when your heart is tempted to romanticize what once harmed you. In a small moment when you can either tell the truth or betray yourself just enough to keep things smooth. That is where integration begins. Integration is what happens when what you have learned becomes how you live. Not just what you say in private, not just what you write in your journal, not just what you understand in your mind, but what your actual life begins to reflect when no one is applauding your growth. A woman may have learned, deeply and sincerely, that she no longer wants to disappear inside her own life. Yet ordinary life will still ask, will you remain present when presence becomes inconvenient? Will you stay honest when honesty risks misunderstanding? Will you protect your peace before you lose it? Will you keep choosing yourself in the unspectacular moments that do not feel important enough to matter, even though they do? Because they do matter. A life is not transformed mainly by grand declarations. It is shaped by repeated ordinary choices, the little yes that should have been a no, the extra task taken on from guilt, the message answered from anxiety rather than readiness. The boundary softened before it had time to stand. The exhaustion ignored because you are so used to being functional. The truth postponed because you do not want to disrupt anyone's comfort. These things may seem small, but a woman's dignity is often strengthened or weakened in exactly these places. One painful but liberating truth is that many women are taught to think of self-abandonment only in large terms. They think of betrayal as something dramatic, a major compromise, a devastating relationship, a collapse. But self-abandonment often returns in miniature. It returns when a woman knows she needs rest, but keeps proving she can do more. It returns when she senses something is off, but talks herself out of her own perception. It returns when she minimizes what drains her because others seem to need her. It returns when she keeps giving emotional access to people who show no real care for the weight of her inner life. It returns when she says, "It's not that serious," simply because she has learned to call deep things small, if naming them might inconvenience someone else. That is why healing must become companionship with truth, not just one season of discovery. Truth must become a daily companion, not harsh, not accusing, not rigid, but faithful, faithful enough to say, "You are tired. You are overreaching. You are slipping back into performance. You are trying to earn what should be mutual. You are saying yes for reasons that will leave resentment behind. You are shrinking again. You are taking on guilt that does not belong to you. You are acting as if your pain must become extreme before it deserves response." This kind of truth is not punishment. It is protection. Many women spend years thinking protection means being rescued by someone else. But one of the deepest forms of healing is discovering that you can become more protective of your own inner life. Not suspicious, not closed. Protective of your mornings. Protective of your energy, protective of your body's signals, protective of your attention, protective of your time, protective of your tenderness, protective of the fragile, honest places inside you that are still learning what safety feels like. That protection is not selfishness. It is stewardship. A woman is not meant to scatter herself so widely that nothing inside her receives careful tending. And still, integration is not only about what you stop doing, it is also about what you begin building. A healed life cannot be built only from refusal, only from no, only from distance, only from what you have left behind. It must also be built from nourishment. What nourishes a woman after long self-abandonment? Sometimes it is very simple. A slower morning, a table that is not cluttered with urgency, a walk where she does not have to perform usefulness, friendship where she does not have to earn warmth through labor, prayer that sounds like honesty instead of pressure, music that returns her to her own interior world, a room that feels like rest instead of demand, food eaten without rushing, laughter that does not cost her dignity. Beauty, she allows herself to notice. Silence that is not lonely because she is learning how to remain with herself inside it. These things are not decorative. They are formative. They teach the nervous system that life does not have to be an emergency to be meaningful. They teach the body that rest is not danger. They teach the soul that gentleness can be real. They teach the heart that peace is not emptiness. They teach a woman that she can belong to her own life without disappearing into everyone else's. There is another truth that becomes important in this stage. Ordinary life will often try to recruit a healed woman back into her old identity. That identity may have been the helper, the peacemaker, the one who never needs much, the one who can handle everything, the one who understands, the one who smooths over tension, the one who can be counted on no matter what it cost her, the one who always absorbs the emotional excess of others. And the world may not notice immediately that she is changing, or it may notice and resist. Family may still expect instant access. Friends may still assume she will carry more. Work may still reward her over-functioning. Old connections may try to reopen, not because true repair has taken place, but because they miss what she used to provide. Even her own mind may tempt her back into familiar patterns because familiar pain can feel easier than unfamiliar dignity. This is why healing requires not only insight, but practice. And not only practice, but repetition. A woman may need to say the same boundary in 10 different ways before it feels natural. She may need to disappoint the same expectations more than once. She may need to let several people misunderstand her. She may need to survive the discomfort of not being who she used to be in order to become who she really is. That is not regression. That is strengthening. Let us ask another reflective question. Why is it so hard to keep growing once life becomes ordinary again? Because ordinary life does not always feel sacred, and yet it is the very place where the soul is formed. There is no special music in the background when you choose not to over-explain. No audience when you leave work on time. No standing ovation when you stop replying from guilt. No public ceremony when you notice an old pattern and gently turn away from it. But those moments are holy all the same. They are holy because they say, I am no longer waiting for collapse to authorize care. I am no longer waiting for someone else to validate my limits. I am no longer making a religion out of endurance. I am no longer giving every part of me away and calling that goodness. I am learning to build a life that my soul can actually live inside. That line matters deeply. A woman may have a beautiful house and still not feel at home in her life. She may have responsibilities fulfilled and still feel spiritually homeless. She may appear strong and still feel disconnected from her own tenderness. She may be admired by many and still feel unseen in the places that matter most. So the question becomes, What kind of life can your soul actually live inside? Not just survive inside. Not just perform inside. Live inside. Can your soul live inside a schedule that leaves no margin for rest? Can your soul live inside relationships that require you to mute your truth? Can your soul live inside work that consumes all your emotional light? Can your soul live inside patterns of constant urgency, constant apology, constant overgiving, constant self-correction? For many women, one honest answer begins to emerge. No, not anymore. And that not anymore is the beginning of a different arrangement with life. Perhaps this is the season where a woman stops asking only, how do I get through this? And begins asking, how do I live in a way that honors who I am becoming? Those are different questions. The first is about survival. The second is about alignment. And alignment often asks for brave simplification. Not every invitation must be accepted. Not every call must be answered immediately. Not every conflict must be managed by you. Not every need in the room belongs to you. Not every role you have carried is still yours to carry. Not every part of your identity that was built in pain deserves to follow you into peace. This is where many women begin grieving again, but in a subtler way. Not the grief of heartbreak exactly, not the grief of obvious loss, but the grief of release, the grief of letting go of being indispensable, the grief of realizing how much of your worth was tied to being needed, the grief of no longer being the emotional center of every room, the grief of letting others be disappointed, the grief of no longer receiving the same praise once you stop overextending, the grief of becoming less convenient to those who once called your depletion devotion. This grief is real, and it deserves tenderness. Because there are versions of identity that women outgrow, but do not stop missing immediately. A woman may know that overgiving exhausted her and still feel strange when she is no longer giving in the same way. She may know that overfunctioning was harming her and still feel exposed when she is no longer earning approval through competence. She may know that constant availability was unsustainable and still feel lonely when she stops receiving the familiar validation that came from being everyone's refuge. That is why integration asks not only, what am I leaving, but also, what am I learning to receive? Can you receive rest without justifying it? Can you receive care without rushing to repay it? Can you receive silence without assuming something is wrong? Can you receive joy without suspicion? Can you receive love without turning it into labor? Can you receive gentleness without needing a crisis to prove you deserve it? These questions matter because some women know how to give far better than they know how to receive. Giving made them feel safe. Giving made them feel valuable. Giving kept them connected. Giving helped them avoid the vulnerable uncertainty of simply being, but healing invites a woman into a deeper truth. You are not only worthy when you are useful, you are worthy when you are resting, worthy when you are grieving, worthy when you are uncertain, worthy when you need support, worthy when you are not impressive, worthy when you are quiet, worthy when you are still becoming. This worth must become lived, not merely spoken. And that takes time, because emotional maturity is not built in slogans. It is built in encounters with real life. In the moment you say, I can't do that today, in the moment you let someone else carry their own consequence, in the moment you resist the urge to rescue a dynamic that is not yours to save, in the moment you stop translating your exhaustion into politeness, In the moment you allow another person's misunderstanding to remain theirs. In the moment you do not chase what has already shown you its limits. In the moment you refuse to call anxiety intuition just because both feel strong. In the moment you treat your own inner life like something entrusted to you, not something to be spent carelessly. There is also something else that becomes clearer in this stage. A healed woman often becomes less dramatic on the outside because she has become more honest on the inside. She no longer needs every feeling to become a crisis. She no longer needs chaos to feel alive. She no longer needs to be chosen to feel valuable. She no longer needs to win every misunderstanding. She no longer needs to be all things to all people. She no longer needs immediate closure from those committed to avoidance. She no longer needs to light herself on fire to prove warmth. That does not mean she feels less deeply. Often she feels more deeply, but with less confusion, less self-betrayal, less performance, less panic. That is a beautiful kind of freedom. And freedom has texture. It is not abstract. It feels like a slower exhale, a clearer no, a cleaner yes, a gentler inner voice, a home that holds peace, a calendar with breathing room, a friendship where honesty does not rupture connection, a body that is no longer forced to scream because you have started listening to its whispers. A heart that can love without kneeling before uncertainty. Many women think healing should make them fearless, but perhaps a more realistic and more beautiful goal is this. Healing makes you less willing to betray yourself in order to avoid fear. You may still feel afraid. Afraid of disappointing, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of loneliness. Afraid of beginning again in some new way. But fear no longer gets the final vote. Truth does. Dignity does. Clarity does. Peace does. The quiet wisdom of your own becoming does. And this is what long-term renewal begins to look like. Not constant emotional intensity, but steady allegiance to what is true. A woman becomes someone who returns to herself as a practice, again and again. After hard conversations, after old triggers, after ordinary fatigue, after moments of confusion, after disappointments, after joy, after progress, after setbacks. She returns, and in returning, she becomes more trustworthy to herself. That is one of the deepest gifts of healing. Not perfection, not invulnerability, but self-loyalty. The kind of self-loyalty that says, even if I am sad, I will not abandon myself. Even if I am lonely, I will not go back to what erases me. Even if I am tired, I will not call depletion my purpose. Even if I am misunderstood, I will not confuse that with being wrong. Even if I am still becoming, I will not treat my unfinishedness as failure. This woman is no longer waiting for a dramatic sign to begin again. She understands now that renewal is not a single door she walks through once. It is a way of walking. And perhaps that is the deeper wisdom beneath all of this. You do not need to become someone else. You need to become more faithful to who you already are. Beneath fear, beneath old adaptation, beneath survival, beneath the long habit of making yourself smaller to remain loved. In the next part, we will move toward the final integration of this message. How to carry both softness and backbone. How to live with open-hearted wisdom in a difficult world. And how a woman comes to understand that beginning again is not proof of failure, but one of the purest forms of grace. There is a kind of womanhood the world often misunderstands. It is not loud enough to impress the shallow, not hard enough to satisfy those who believe pain must make a woman severe, not performative enough to attract constant attention, not fragile enough to invite easy rescue. It is the womanhood of softness with backbone. And that combination is more powerful than many people realize. Because softness without backbone can leave a woman vulnerable to being shaped by every demand, every expectation, every passing hunger of others. But backbone without softness can make life feel guarded, rigid, and emotionally far away. What many women are truly reaching for is neither surrender nor armor. It is integration, a way of being in which the heart stays open, but not undefended. A way of speaking in which truth is clear, but not cruel. A way of loving in which tenderness remains, but self-erasure does not. A way of living in which grace is present, but dignity is never traded for the appearance of peace. This kind of integration does not arrive all at once. It is grown, tested, practiced in the ordinary places. A woman may first discover her backbone when she says no and survives the guilt. She may first discover her backbone when she tells the truth and survives the misunderstanding. She may first discover her backbone when she walks away from what once felt necessary and survives the loneliness that follows. She may first discover her backbone when she stops begging to be chosen and learns that she is still whole, still breathing, still capable of joy on the other side of that decision. And she may first rediscover her softness when she realizes that boundaries did not turn her into stone. They simply returned her to honesty. This matters because many women carry an old fear. If I become stronger, will I become colder? It is a tender fear, an understandable one, especially for women who have watched pain make people sharp, who have seen disappointment turn into cynicism, who have seen unhealed wounds become cruelty, who have seen people build entire identities around not needing anyone, not trusting anyone, not hoping, not opening, not feeling. A woman who values tenderness does not want that fate. She does not want to become unreachable. She does not want to make a shrine out of her hurt. She does not want to punish the future for what the past failed to give. She does not want her wisdom to cost her warmth. And perhaps it does not have to. Perhaps true strength is not measured by how little you feel. Perhaps it is measured by how truthfully you can feel without abandoning yourself. Perhaps true wisdom is not becoming untouched. Perhaps it is learning what deserves access and what does not. Perhaps grace is not endless accommodation. Perhaps grace is what happens when truth and mercy learn to live in the same voice. A woman with softness and backbone knows how to say, I understand, and still, this is not acceptable. I care, and still, I cannot carry this for you. I wish you well, and still, I must leave what harms me. I forgive what I need to forgive in order to be free, but I will not call an unsafe place home again. I can be compassionate toward your struggle without making your struggle my lifelong assignment. Those sentences are not unkind. They are grown, and growth in women is often less celebrated than sacrifice. The world is very comfortable with a woman who gives until she disappears. A woman who absorbs impact. A woman who smooths out discomfort. A woman who makes everything more manageable for everyone around her. But the world is often less comfortable with a woman who remains loving and also becomes clear. Why? Because clarity changes arrangements. It changes what others can count on from you. It changes who gets access. It changes the emotional labor you are willing to provide. It changes how quickly you excuse poor behavior. It changes whether confusion can continue feeding on your hope. It changes whether your life is organized around truth or around keeping everyone else from facing themselves. And not everyone benefits from that change. This is one of the deeper lessons many women learn in healing. Some people liked your kindness, but not your boundaries. Some people liked your generosity, but not your honesty. Some people liked your availability, but not your wholeness. Some people liked what you offered, but were never prepared to honor the person offering it. That realization can be painful, but it can also be cleansing. Because once a woman sees this clearly, she can stop wasting her tenderness where there is no reverence for it. She can stop interpreting resistance as proof that she is wrong. She can stop assuming that every uncomfortable reaction means she has failed at love. She can stop trying to be softer in places that are asking her, in truth, to become smaller. There is an important difference between softness and surrender. Softness is openness to life. Surrender, in the unhealthy sense, is the abandonment of self. Softness can cry and still remain clear. Softness can listen and still say no. Softness can grieve and still walk away. Softness can love and still require mutuality. Softness can remain kind without becoming available to harm. That is what makes it powerful. Because softness with discernment is not weakness. It is emotional intelligence under pressure. And backbone, too, deserves to be understood correctly. Backbone is not hostility. It is not harshness. It is not an appetite for conflict. It is not becoming impossible to reach. Backbone is the inner steadiness that says, I will not betray what I know in order to stay comfortable. I will not silence my own spirit to preserve an illusion. I will not keep negotiating with what has already shown me its pattern. I will not require my pain to become catastrophic before I believe it. I will not keep handing my life over to dynamics that leave me diminished. Backbone is how a woman stands beside herself. That may be one of the most healing images of all. A woman standing beside herself, not above herself in criticism, not against herself in shame, not outside herself, monitoring how everyone else feels, but beside herself, protective, honest, steady, compassionate, present. A woman who learns to stand beside herself moves differently through the world. She does not panic as quickly when someone misunderstands her. She does not explain every boundary until it loses its shape. She does not chase every silence for answers. She does not interpret every withdrawal as evidence that she should have asked for less. She does not keep turning herself inside out for people who keep meeting her with half presents and half truths. This does not mean life becomes painless. It means pain is no longer allowed to become the architect of her entire identity. And perhaps that is where grace enters most deeply. Not grace as sentiment, not grace as passivity, not grace as a spiritual way of avoiding hard realities, but grace as permission to begin again before collapse, permission to change your mind when truth becomes clearer, permission to outgrow what once felt necessary, permission to become less available to what diminishes you, permission to be unfinished and still worthy, permission to be tender and still protective, permission to need rest without earning it through exhaustion, permission to choose peace without writing a defense of why you deserve it, permission to stop calling chronic depletion devotion, permission to believe that your life does not have to break apart completely before you are allowed to rebuild it. This is why beginning again is not proof of failure. It is often proof that something living in you still refuses to die. A woman begins again because something in her knows there is more truth than this, more dignity than this, more mutuality than this, more room than this, more life than this, more honesty than this, more peace than this, more self-respect than this, more grace than remaining where she is merely surviving. Beginning again is not a confession that you got everything wrong. Sometimes it is a confession that you finally know enough to stop continuing what is wrong for you. And that kind of beginning may happen many times in a life. A woman may begin again in love, begin again in friendship, begin again in the way she speaks to herself, begin again in her work, begin again in the way she rests, begin again in the standards she sets for what enters her home, her schedule, her body, her heart. Begin again in how she defines goodness. Begin again in what she is willing to call normal. Begin again in how she carries both her grief and her hope. There is no shame in that. Trees begin again. Seasons begin again. Light begins again each morning without apology. The body itself begins again in countless small acts of repair while no one is watching. Why should a woman be ashamed to begin again? Why should she believe that because she once tolerated less, she must continue tolerating it? Why should she think that because she once mistook longing for love, she is condemned to repeat that mistake forever? Why should she think that because she once built her life around endurance, she no longer deserves a life built around honesty? One of the gentlest and strongest truths a woman can carry is this: I am allowed to revise the way I live when deeper truth appears. That revision is not inconsistency. It is maturity. It is what happens when a woman stops worshiping her old coping mechanisms simply because they once got her through. It is what happens when she stops mistaking familiarity for alignment. It is what happens when she stops defending her own suffering just because she survived it. It is what happens when she understands that staying the same is not always loyalty. Sometimes it is fear. And fear does not need to be hated. It only needs to be recognized. A woman may still feel afraid as she begins again. Afraid of the unknown. Afraid of emptiness. Afraid of what others will say. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of making a mistake, afraid of choosing differently and still feeling pain. But courage does not require the absence of fear. It requires a deeper allegiance, an allegiance to truth, to peace, to dignity, to what her spirit knows when everything performative falls away. And the beautiful thing is this: the more often a woman honors that deeper allegiance, the more natural it becomes. At first, her new life may feel delicate, like fresh roots not yet deep in the ground, like a voice returning after years of silence, like a house still under construction. But over time, what once felt difficult becomes easier. What once felt guilt-producing becomes clean. What once felt lonely becomes spacious. What once felt unfamiliar becomes home. And home, in the deepest sense, may simply be this: the place inside yourself where truth no longer has to fight to be heard. The place where your own needs are not your enemies. The place where your softness is protected instead of spent recklessly. The place where grief is allowed but not enthroned. The place where joy is welcomed without suspicion. The place where you do not have to break in order to matter. The place where your life is no longer shaped mainly by fear of loss, but by reverence for what is true. This is the woman many are quietly becoming. Not perfect, not untouched, not always certain, not always strong in the ways the world likes to celebrate, but real, whole in a growing way, wise without becoming hard, open without becoming naive, tender without disappearing, clear without cruelty, able to begin again, not because she failed, but because grace has taught her that renewal belongs to the living. In the final part, we will gather all of this into one closing truth: how a woman honors the life she has lived without becoming trapped in it, how she carries forward both memory and freedom, and why she never needed devastation in order to deserve a new beginning. There is a final tenderness in healing that many women do not recognize right away. It is not the tenderness of being rescued, not the tenderness of finally being chosen by someone else, not the tenderness of life becoming easy, or of every wound closing without a trace. It is the tenderness of no longer needing to argue with your own life in order to honor it. It is the moment a woman can look at where she has been at, the love she gave, the years she lost, the silence she swallowed, the room she stayed in too long, the roles she carried past her strength, the ways she confused endurance with goodness, the ways she mistook being needed for being cherished, and instead of collapsing into shame, she says something quieter, wiser, kinder: I understand now, and I am still allowed to live. That sentence may be one of the deepest forms of grace, because many women do not only carry pain, they carry judgment about the pain. They do not only grieve what happened, they grieve that they let it happen. They do not only mourn what they lost, they mourn the fact that they did not leave sooner, speak sooner, rest sooner, know sooner, choose themselves sooner. And that second layer of suffering can be very heavy. It can make a woman feel as though she must somehow earn her own forgiveness, as though she must become wiser than human, stronger than grief, more polished than truth, before she is finally allowed to lay the past down and step into something cleaner. But perhaps one of the most liberating truths a woman can receive is this: you do not honor your past by staying trapped inside it. You honor your past by learning from it without kneeling before it. You honor your past by letting it teach you where your dignity was lost and where it must now be rebuilt. You honor your past by refusing to romanticize what diminished you. You honor your past by telling the truth about what was painful and still refusing to become cruel. You honor your past by carrying forward the wisdom, not the self-punishment. This is what it means to hold memory without letting memory become a prison. Memory matters. It can protect. It can illuminate. It can help a woman recognize old patterns sooner. It can make her more discerning, more honest, more awake to what drains her and what steadies her. But memory is meant to become wisdom, not a permanent courtroom. A woman was never meant to spend the rest of her life standing trial before her own regret. And yet many do. They keep revisiting old choices, not to understand them, but to condemn themselves for having been tender, hopeful, trusting, hungry for love, hungry for rest, hungry for belonging. hungry for a place where they could finally exhale. But hunger is not a crime. Longing is not stupidity. Hope is not weakness. Tenderness is not failure. What matters is not that you once longed in places that could not feed you well. What matters is whether now, with greater clarity, you are willing to feed your own life more honestly. There is another quiet question many women carry. How do I move forward without denying the woman I used to be? The answer is not by despising her, not by talking about her as though she were foolish, pathetic, blind, or naive, not by acting as if she deserved the pain because she stayed too long, not by mocking her softness just because it was once mishandled, not by pretending you can cut her off from your story and still become whole. That woman is still part of you. The woman who hoped, the woman who overgave, the woman who kept trying, the woman who thought if she just loved well enough, served well enough, waited long enough, understood deeply enough, maybe something steadier would finally arrive. The woman who got tired but kept going. The woman who needed tenderness and often did not know how to ask for it clearly. The woman who sometimes asked in all the wrong places. The woman who called herself strong while quietly breaking. She is not someone to be erased. She is someone to be gathered with compassion, with honesty, with dignity. You do not become whole by disowning the versions of yourself that suffered. You become whole by bringing them home. And bringing them home means saying, you were doing what you knew. You were surviving with the tools you had. You were trying to create safety with an understanding of love that was still forming. You were not wrong for wanting more tenderness than you received. You were not weak for hoping. You were not foolish for staying before you understood the full cost. But we do know more now. And because we know more now, we will live differently. That is healing with backbone. That is compassion without self-deception. That is mercy joined to truth. Sometimes women think that if they fully release the past, they will somehow lose the lessons it taught them. But letting go is not forgetting. It is not pretending. It is not flattening the story until it sounds simple and polished and spiritually neat. Letting go is refusing to keep bleeding in order to prove that something mattered. A woman can say, that mattered. That shaped me. That hurt me. That changed what I now understand. And still, I will not spend the rest of my life circling the same wound as though pain were the only proof that I love sincerely. That is freedom. Freedom is not the absence of memory. It is the absence of bondage to memory. Freedom is when the past can visit without governing the room. Freedom is when grief can speak without becoming your only language. Freedom is when you can remember what happened without abandoning the life in front of you. Freedom is when your story contains sorrow, yes, but also breath, space, dignity, beauty, new choices, wiser love, steadier rhythms, and the unmistakable sound of a woman no longer betraying herself to remain acceptable. That is a sacred sound, and perhaps that is the real beginning many women are longing for. Not a dramatic reinvention, not a fantasy of becoming someone untouched by what has happened, but the quiet, daily miracle of no longer living as though pain has the final authority, because pain can instruct, pain can expose, pain can humble, pain can reveal where healing is needed and where truth has been delayed. But pain is not meant to become your permanent teacher. At some point, wisdom must take its place, and wisdom says, you do not need more evidence that something is hurting you. You do not need a more dramatic ending in order to justify a more honest beginning. You do not need another heartbreak to prove the first one mattered. You do not need to lose every part of yourself before deciding to protect what remains. You do not need complete collapse before you are allowed to rebuild. You do not need devastation in order to deserve a new beginning. That truth deserves to be said slowly. You do not need devastation in order to deserve a new beginning. You do not need the relationship to become unbearable. You do not need the job to break your body. You do not need the friendship to humiliate you publicly. You do not need the family dynamic to completely shatter you. You do not need your spirit to become numb. You do not need to hit bottom in order to respect what your soul has been whispering for a long time. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is respond to a whisper before it becomes a scream, to notice the fatigue before it becomes collapse, to notice the sadness before it becomes despair, to notice the resentment before it becomes bitterness, to notice the misalignment before it becomes a life she no longer recognizes, to notice the way she keeps vanishing in certain spaces and choose with trembling, if necessary, to stop vanishing. That is not overreaction. That is wisdom in its early form. And wisdom often begins very quietly. A woman decides she will no longer explain her limits into dust. She decides she will stop requiring herself to be in crisis before she rests. She decides to believe the pattern she sees. She decides that her peace is not an afterthought. She decides that tenderness deserves structure. She decides that clarity is kinder than endless confusion. She decides that grief can be honored without being enthroned. She decides that being a good woman does not require being a perpetually depleted one. She decides that softness and self-respect are not enemies. She decides that love should not require self-erasure. She decides, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, that she will stand beside herself. And from that place, life begins to change in ways both small and profound. Not because all pain disappears, but because self-abandonment is no longer the price of connection. Not because every ending stops hurting, but because every ending no longer becomes proof of personal unworthiness. Not because she becomes fearless, but because fear is no longer allowed to speak louder than truth. Not because she controls every outcome, but because she no longer needs to collapse in order to permit change. This is what grace can look like when it becomes embodied in a woman's ordinary life. It looks like making tea in a quiet kitchen and not rushing to fill the silence. It looks like saying no without writing a full defense. It looks like noticing heaviness and responding sooner. It looks like pausing before overcommitting. It looks like leaving one room, one role, one conversation, one expectation that no longer fits the soul. It looks like accepting that some people preferred the smaller version of you and not shrinking back to comfort them. It looks like letting your life become slower, truer, more breathable. It looks like choosing relationships where your full humanity does not feel like too much. It looks like honoring the body that carried you through so much by no longer using it as a machine for proving your worth. It looks like understanding that your spirit, too, is part of the life you are responsible for tending. Many women were taught to care for everything except their own interior life. They care for children, partners, family systems, deadlines, emotions in the room, the hidden labor no one names, the practical needs, the emergencies, the harmony, the schedule, the image of being fine. But an unlived interior life has a cost. A woman can become very successful at appearing composed while growing spiritually homeless. She can become very skilled at showing up while quietly disappearing. She can become admired, even needed, and still feel far away from herself. That is why this message matters so deeply. Because beginning again is not only about leaving what hurts, it is about returning to what is true, returning to the voice beneath all the old conditioning, returning to the wisdom beneath all the performance, returning to the body that has been speaking in whispers, returning to the soul that has been asking for a more honest life, returning to the woman who was never meant to become whole by being chosen by others, but by finally coming home to herself. And coming home to yourself does not always look triumphant. Sometimes it looks like grief. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like confusion followed by a cleaner choice. Sometimes it looks like disappointing people. Sometimes it looks like feeling lonely for a while. Sometimes it looks like starting over in small, unspectacular ways that no one else fully understands. But none of that makes it less real. A seed does not look dramatic in the dark soil. A foundation does not look glamorous before the house is built. A voice does not sound powerful the first day it returns after years of silence. And still, all of these things matter. All of these things are beginnings. So perhaps, dear woman, the invitation now is not to wait for life to break you open one more time, not to wait for one more betrayal, one more collapse, one more season of proving that you can endure what should never have been normal in the first place. Perhaps the invitation is gentler than that and stronger. Perhaps it is simply this: tell the truth sooner, rest sooner, listen sooner, leave sooner when your soul knows, speak sooner when your dignity asks, grieve what must be grieved, bless what must be released, forgive what needs forgiving without returning to what erases you, build slowly, choose clearly, love wisely, remain soft, remain awake, remain beside yourself. And when you need to begin again, begin, not with shame, not with apology, not with the belief that starting over is evidence of failure. Begin because you are alive. Begin because truth has become clearer. Begin because your spirit is worth protecting before it is exhausted. Begin because peace does not have to be earned through devastation. Begin because wisdom has finally reached the places where performance used to live. Begin because there is dignity in responding before collapse. Begin because the life ahead of you deserves a woman who no longer waits to disappear before she gives herself permission to return. And if you forget this, as all human beings sometimes do, let this final truth remain close. You do not need to be shattered in order to become new. You do not need to lose everything in order to honor what is asking to change. You do not need to justify your healing with greater pain. You do not need to reach a breaking point to prove that your spirit matters. You do not need to become harder to become wiser. You do not need to be chosen to become whole. You only need the courage to come back to yourself with truth, with mercy, with patience, and with the quiet willingness to let your life begin again from a place that no longer requires your abandonment. That is not failure. That is grace.